Hi, everybody. Is this working? Can you hear me? Great. Okay. My talk is about engineering owning velocity. I kind of intentionally chose a provocative title. I think probably like many people in engineering, when people who are not engineers talk about velocity, it kind of makes my eyes roll a little bit. This is kind of like, rather than resist, maybe we should lean into it a little bit more. Super brief intro. Some of it was in her intro. I don't need to talk about it. Maybe the interesting part is, I guess about 3 years ago, I'd been working at Etsy for 10 years, and I was given the opportunity to move over to Depop, which Etsy had acquired, as the chief product officer with no engineering responsibilities, which, to be honest, was super weird. I've never worked in product in my entire life, but somebody thought it was a good idea. It's been 2.5 years, still there, so maybe it has worked. And it's been really interesting to see engineering from the outside in. And to work every day with product managers and not engineering leaders and kind of see their view of the world has been really interesting. So maybe some of this talk is to convey that. And a little bit more is about being on an executive team. I've never been on a real executive team before. And there are some interesting learnings from that too that I think apply well for people kind of at any level of engineering leadership. And one thing that's been confirmed for me working outside engineering is engineering really is a superpower. Engineers are the people who can not only identify problems, but also build the solutions to these problems. Back in 2011, Mark Andreessen said software is eating the world. Now we're in 2024, software has eaten the world. The meal is finished. And so like if you're a company like Depop or Etsy, or probably many in this room, basically this is where growth comes from. You change your software, it changes customer behavior, and ideally your company grows. And so now more than ever, companies are deeply, deeply dependent on engineering, which if you're an engineer is nice. But what we found out, it's kind of scary to people as well, right? No, I'm not. I thought I was standing right in front of the slide. Anyway, I think, they're really feeling this dependency. We've kind of gotten out of this zero interest rate phenomenon. In the past, if people wanted more from engineering, they just hired more engineers. Money was free. That's what you could do. Now everyone's being told you can't hire more engineers. And so they're like, oh my God, how do we get more out of this engineering team? And of course, the other side of that is, how do we assess whether engineering team is any good or getting better? I think one of the things that I've observed immediately about product managers when I started working with them is most of them have no good way of assessing what engineers tell them or what engineering managers tell them. If they say it's hard, if the engineer says it's hard, they would come back to me and say it's really hard. And I'd be like, not that hard. Or they'd say like this should be easy. And I'd be like, not that easy. I kind of had the cheat code a little bit as the CPO because at least I've done this for a long time. So I think, and this is the part that feels risky to people, is that they're completely dependent on a thing that they don't understand. And as I said, really even more scary now that efficiency really matters, and probably how many people in this room could hire tons of people a couple of years ago and can't hire anyone now. It's just, that's the story of our lives these days. And so, that's led to this really fun question. Okay, well, how do we measure engineering productivity, and how do we prove that we're becoming more productive, And I have a big list in my speaker notes of ways people try to measure engineering productivity. All of them are incomplete. Some of them are useful, sort of. But they're mostly actually useful to engineers. Like if you're a non-engineer and you try and look at the engineering productivity tools, that's also kind of confusing and incomplete. So we have to even explain that. Which kind of brings me to the two jobs of a CTO. And I think one is obviously super obvious. Our job is to create value with engineering teams. That's what we do. People, process, technology. How do we change these things so that the team gets better, put people in the right place, change the org structure, change your architecture. These are all things you can do. But I think I'll talk about some other ways we can create value. And then on the other hand, on the executive team, your job is also to be like a credible representative of engineering. You're sitting in a room with people, none of whom are engineers. They're all hoping the engineering team gets a lot done, but they don't know. They assume maybe if they think you're good that they are, but they probably in many cases suspect that it could be better. And so a lot of this is how do we sort of convey to people that they can trust the engineering team with this like massive amount of responsibility that we have in these organizations. And so maybe switching to track a little bit, this is where in some ways product managers come in. So uh, maybe I'll just jump in and talk about kind of how I think about product management. I have 2 quotes, both from former coworkers at Etsy. One is, the job of a product manager is prioritization. This was said to me years ago by the person, Nick, who's now the chief product officer of Etsy. And the other one that I really liked, that I heard probably with the first real product manager I worked with, I think I was probably explaining to her how something worked, why we're doing it this way versus that way. And she said, product managers deal in outcomes. I don't care. That was basically her way of saying, I don't care how you do it. I care what we're doing and how much value it creates. And I was like, great, but it'll be useful if you knew. But she really didn't care. And I think, but that was a learning opportunity for me. I could see why she didn't care that much about it, with some reflection. And so really a product manager's job is to take all this input from engineering, from design, from analytics, from talking to customers, and really figure out what the most important things the company can be doing. When I put my CPO hat back on, that's also true of the CPO. It's like, what do we need to build to grow the company? That is the question the CPO has to answer every day. And then the CPO is like, great, how do we build the things? How can we actually build these things efficiently, I suppose. So now I'm going to go back to that job 1, which is maximizing value creation. If we say, okay, the CPO is wearing the what hat, and the CTO is wearing this kind of how hat, as it were, then I think where we land is PMs prioritize the outcomes, but engineers should sequence the work. That sub-prioritization, and the reason I say this, I'll go with the metaphor. Everybody knows the rocks in the jar metaphor. If you put the big rocks in the jar before the little rocks, you can fit more rocks into the jar. Basically what I've found with people who are not engineers is it's very hard for them to tell the rocks apart, or they rank the rocks by sort of importance or value creation or these other things. The engineers kind of know, engineering kind of top to bottom has a much better idea of how it affects the capacity of the jar, the order that you put them in there. And so I think this is really the role we have to play as leaders in the broader organization. We can bring that deep knowledge, that deep context of how things are done, so that the company actually can gain efficiency. Sure, you can gain efficiency, I don't know, by giving developers access to Copilot or some of these other things. But in my experience, efficiency is gained mostly by sequencing work correctly. And this is the thing that I think engineering can do beyond actually doing the work. And so one way to think about it is velocity is an optimization problem. How do we optimize the way in which we tackle goals so that we can get more done? This to me is like the interesting role that engineering has to play in the business. And really it is a matter of negotiation in some way. So first I'll say we have to engage with it. I think a lot of times I find engineering leaders, they don't want to engage with that back and forth with the product team or with the CFO or with the CEO or whoever else. They don't entirely hate the idea that work gets thrown over the wall and you go do it and you tell people when it's done and off you go on to the next thing. But I don't think that works so well anymore when efficiency is demanded. We have to push back and say, okay, if you care about efficiency, we need to think about how we sequence and structure our work so that we can do it efficiently, which can be tedious for sure, but I think we kind of have to step up and at least give it a shot. And then this kind of leads into the next job that I talked about, which is really building confidence with the rest of the org. So when we come to the meeting and they say, hey, the most important thing we can do this quarter is some magical project that will make us lots of money. And we say, you know what, we also have to do this migration before the end of the year. And if we do the migration before we do the really big project that will make us lots of money, we'll get both done in much less time and it will be super efficient. Then I'll go, well, that's what an engineer would say. I think we have to have that credibility so they listen when we advocate for the kind of work sequencing that works best from an engineering perspective. So that brings me in. Really, the rest of this talk is about this second part, engendering confidence in our partners. And I think this applies to me as a CTO. It applies to engineering managers, senior engineers, kind of everybody. And so I have a few things that, I guess tips for engineering confidence in PMs or whoever it happens to be. In my case, maybe it's the chief marketing officer. I think at least I don't have to negotiate with myself. I don't have a CPO partner, so I get to do the what and the how, which is kind of nice. So I'll talk a little bit about shared goals. I think the importance of shared goals cannot possibly be overstated. And the most common pattern I see is you have product goals and engineering goals. There are two lists, and there's this constant back and forth. The engineering leader says, hey, we need to work on the engineering stuff some. And the product, manager says, I'm accountable for delivering these outcomes this quarter. And if we do your stuff, we're not going to be able to do my stuff. And my stuff is the stuff that, they're only judged on outcomes. Not only do they only care about outcomes, but it really is only what they're judged on. So they can be a tough negotiating partner. And I'm seeing it. I was thinking as I was working on this, we had an embarrassing outage. And the outcome of this outage was basically that we need to rebuild some back-end system. It wasn't going to lead to growth. It was just going to basically eliminate the risk that we would have this problem again. And when the team came to their next quarterly planning meeting, the people from the engineering leadership asked the question, hey, are we going to work on remediating this thing so we don't have this kind of incident again? And the PM said, yes, that is last on our priority list. And I think people were a little surprised on the engineering side to hear that. And the engineering manager said, well, but we can't really do this other thing that we need to do if we don't do the other thing first. And so it's we have some goal conflict here, you don't think we can do it yet. And this is the kind of thing that happens all the time. And so, my basic conclusion, and it happens all the time, nothing special about what these two people did, it kind of gets hashed out this way instead of the PM and the engineering manager really getting on the same page and having a mutual understanding, and the engineer accepts that there are some business goals that are tough to negotiate. And they also explain that this remediation needs to be done, and maybe it won't take as much time as they think if they do it properly or whatever. But a lot of times those conversations kind of get skipped. And the result is you just have you live in this world of goal conflict. And I think probably everyone in this room knows what happens then. The engineering stuff gets deprioritized because, it's kind of internal to engineering, and we're not showing up for that negotiation. And then you have to go to AMAs with your team and they ask why we don't care about tech debt. Are we a feature factory? All of these other things, which I think is fair, And I think it's on us to sort of bridge that gap. It's a hard job, but I think it's an important one. The second one is, I call this estimate optimistically and enumerate risks. And I think another one that's maybe is a zero interest rate phenomenon is refusing to make estimates. I think probably when I was an IC engineer, I could send people links to blog posts from really smart engineers explaining that estimation is a total waste of time. It's useless. The estimates are always wrong, so just don't make me do it. But I think especially in this era, people want to know how much things cost. The estimate is a cost estimate, There are plenty of things that you might want to build that are a great deal for 1 month of work that are a terrible deal for 6 months of work. And who's going to tell you which one of those things it is? It's an engineer. So my first tip of estimation is kind of you have to do it. You don't have to, but I don't know it's going to work out well in the current era if you don't. I think the second one is, and I see this a fair amount, people estimate when something is going to be done rather than telling you how long it's going to take. So what's the estimate? It'll be done in Q3. It's okay, but will it be done in Q3 because you're doing 8 things first? Or is it going to be done in Q3 because it takes 3 months to do? And, I think basically, that's a little I don't know if it's a lack of transparency or just not wanting to engage deeply or what the real thing with it is. But it's problematic. Again, we need to know how much things are going to cost. And then the third one, and that's really what this slide is about, is padded estimates. How long is it going to take? 3 months. Well, what's the best case? In the best case, it will take 1 month, but bad stuff could happen. And, I much prefer for people to tell me the month and then say, okay, but here are the 5 things that could delay delivery of this thing. If we have to go work on the refund code, that will probably add 2 weeks. If we have to do something else, it'll add another week, roughly. Again, these estimates are never quite right. And so it'll be between 2 and 3 months, and everybody involved can think about the trade-offs and say, okay, maybe we don't need to do it this way if it eliminates this risk or whatever. And then I think the bonus that I think often find that people don't get is if you raise something as a risk before the project and it manifests, then you look like a smart person who has lots of foresight about what's going on. If you don't tell people about the risks before you work on the project, they think you're an excuse maker when it's late. Why was it late? These 5 things. Great, well, I already knew about those 5 things. Sucks that it happened. If they don't know, they're just okay, yeah, you could come up with any 5 things to explain why your project is late. So I think leaning into this estimation is a huge huge part of building credibility as an engineering team. And then the third one, and I was going to say this is the most important, but I actually think all these are really important, is speaking in the language of value creation. I think if you listen to a PM talk about what they're working on, they say, we're going to improve the search ranking algorithm by adding more personalization features to it. And more people are going to click on search results and more people are going to buy them and we're going to make money. And then you talk to an engineer and they say, we need to, rebuild our Stripe integration. It's like, okay, but why do we need to rebuild the Stripe integration? And usually other engineers have a pretty good idea why you might want to do so. But on the business side, people don't know. And so, you need to say, we need to rebuild our Stripe integration so that all of our payments projects for the next 2 years will get done faster, so that we're not worried about the end of life of the current integration that we have. It will eliminate the risk of a certain class of bugs that could cause outages. You just have to go to the trouble to explain the business value of what you're doing. Again, so that things can be rationally prioritized. If you don't tell people what the value is, people generally, inside engineering too, but in a different way, prioritize by value. And so you kind of have to state the value of what you're doing if you want people to care about it. And then, and that's kind of it. I think, maybe what I should have called my talk, although again, maybe less people would be interested, is engineering should own velocity. I think we're the best equipped to do it. I think it's a lot of work, but I think as engineering leaders, it's really part of our job. And I think especially in this economy, it's super important. I think that, I was going to say one more thing about it. And that is that, well, maybe I don't remember what I was going to say at the end of this. Anyway, I'll just stick with that and say, even though it stinks, like we are the people who should do it. And I think, and I think it kind of leans to our superpower of problem solving. Velocity is a problem to be solved. And so, if we can solve it for other people, we'll be appreciated a lot more and people will trust that they're getting a good deal for the engineering team that they have. That's it.